All right, Carlos Toro is here with me. We are here to recap Oleksandr Usyk upsetting Anthony Joshua to become the new heavyweight champion. Right before this fight, I listened to you and Robert's segment on the Pound for Pound Boxing podcast, and you both said if you had to make a prediction, the right prediction is probably Joshua winning by a couple or a few rounds. But you both said that it was not a prediction that either of you were super comfortable in.
Mhm.
Watching that fight back with that thought in mind, did it sort of happen? If Usyk was going to win this fight, did it happen the way that you thought he would have had to win it?
I would say so. Yes. I remember. First of all, yeah, Robert and I. Well, I don't know if Robert's gonna own up fully when we record our podcast. I will fully own up. I thought Joshua was gonna win. I had it at I thought it was gonna be like a 7-5, very close Anthony Joshua win. But yeah, to me, I think part of whoever was gonna win that fight was going to be the one who dictated the pace from the very beginning of the fight and who controlled the action. And that was all Usyk. I mean, those first 3 rounds, in my opinion, Usyk was boxing beautifully. He wasn't exactly putting the fight, at super close range, but he wasn't fighting at a distance where Joshua was able to fully extend his arms and fully, get that power through. It was sort of like that mid range, which is basically what I said on the preview. That's where Usyk maybe is arguably at his best. We saw that in the fight against Tony Bellew a couple of years ago in his lone title defense as undisputed cruiserweight champion. That Usyk was hurting using different angles and moving around at sort of that mid range, not necessarily bringing down your neck, but somewhere in that between gray spot. That's where Usyk excels at his best. And every time you saw him dominate the fight, it was always from that range and from that distance. Those first 3 rounds, Usyk boxed about as well as one could hope. Joshua just he did not look great coming out. He looked a little bit sluggish. I know at times Joshua does have a tendency to start off just a tad bit slow, but overall, it just felt like Joshua never fully got out of second gear until like maybe the 6th round, which you can argue was his best round. But after that, Usyk made the adjustments, and whatever adjustments Josh made, Usyk made adjustments to that on the fly, which is why Usyk essentially won that fight. Josh wanted to have a boxing match, and you're not going to win a boxing match against someone who is probably, in my mind, the number one pound for pound boxer in the world. As far as overall complete, you can still sort of make an argument, but as far as ability, Usyk to me is the number one fighter in the world. He's that good, and I 116 to 112 didn't have a problem with the scores or with Usyk winning. He just boxed beautifully tonight.
So the scores, the official scores were 117, 112. So I'm assuming round 12 was a 10-8 on that scorecard. 116, 112, which is what you had, and 115, 113. Now, I'm going to explain my scorecard. And when I thought about it, and then I saw Robert Silva's scorecard, we had the exact same scorecard. Now, I don't know if it was exactly all the same rounds, but we both came out with a draw. Now, some people might go, oh, like what fight were you watching? So I'll explain it here, which is when I watch boxing, the thing that is very relevant in my mind is when each person hits each other. I don't always look at those punches as being equal. Like, for instance, if somebody hits someone with a jab and somebody hits somebody with a power shot, you grade the power shot a little bit higher, unless it's like 20 jabs, just a very active jabber. I watched a fight when I was 9 years old. It was Michael Spinks coming up from light heavyweight to challenge the then undefeated Larry Holmes for the heavyweight championship. And Michael Spinks boxed exactly the kind of fight that he had to do to win. And it was a close fight. But I always came away from that fight thinking, like, man, if all you have to do is just touch somebody and it counts just as much as someone throwing a much better shot, I don't like that. And so they fought a second time. I thought Holmes clearly won that fight. Spinks gets out of it. I forget it was a split decision or something, and Spinks keeps the title. And from that point on, as a young fan, I would have been 10 years old in that rematch. I very clearly was like, okay, even though these announcers make these wild, invigorating exclamations about a punch hitting, I want to be unbiased in watching and seeing if that punch lands. So I saw there was a couple of times where Anthony Joshua threw a short right hand. All the announcers talked over it as if it never happened. The second Usyk threw one down the pipe, it was like the best punch of the fight, and there was like lots of excitement. And so I was very aware that was happening during this, and it might simply be Todd Grisham as a lead boxing play-by-play guy. You know, when we have Jim Lampley out there just kind of hanging out and doing nothing, like Lampley should be Canelo, right? Lampley shouldn't have a contract tied to any broadcasting company. He should be on a one fight deal for every fight. Let's just bring Lampley in. Let Al Heyman, you know, for the Canelo fight, let's bring Lampley in. You know, for the DAZN fights, for the big ones, let's bring Lampley in. Like that I think that's very necessary, because I think Grisham was a little bit out of his league. So I'm watching this fight, and there were a lot of close rounds that the audience at large and that the announcers had going to Usyk. And when I watched them, I thought they were maybe a little closer to Joshua's round, and that's how I scored them. Now, I'm not saying that all of those people were wrong and I'm right. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that sometimes when it is a little guy fighting a big guy, even if Usyk comes down the pipe with a big left hand, Joshua could probably hold up to that punch. And when Joshua throws a right hand, or when Joshua just throws a jab and all of a sudden you see the eye marked up, to me that says, okay, he's hitting him harder than we even realize, because the whole time the announcers are saying, oh, you know, Joshua's not throwing hard punches, and, you know, he doesn't want to wind up, because if he winds up and misses, then he's going to get countered and off balance and blah, 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 blah. And all of that is true. So I haven't talked to Robert about this yet, but I wonder if Robert sort of saw the fight in the same way that I did, which is just because Usyk hit him flushly and it looked great and it was a brilliant shot, doesn't mean that those punches overvalued some of the punches that Joshua was landing. So that's the only thing that I would say as to sort of explain my scorecard. The difference in the Spinks and Holmes fight from this one, Michael Spinks did not hurt Larry Holmes one time.
Right.
Usyk clearly hurt Joshua in this fight. And not only that, but he closed the championship rounds like a champ. He 11 and 12, he made Joshua look silly in the 12th round. I was just like, if this thing is 30 seconds longer, Joshua's going down and maybe not getting up. So that's the difference. I completely agree that Usyk won this fight. He looked awesome. Now we have a little bit of a different mentality going into some of these other fights, because Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder fight, I'm guessing that fight is a little bit closer to what has happened before. I think Fury's just too good of a boxer. And then, you know, we'll see what happens then. But now Usyk is kind of in the mix as the top guy at heavyweight, even though, you know, he's probably 25, 30 pounds smaller than the top guys. So what do you think about him at that level, you know, with Tyson Fury, he's just beat Joshua. Joshua's probably going to get a rematch, but is he at that level to compete with Fury as the best heavyweight going?
To me right now, I think it's a 1A, 1B type of situation where I kind of have Fury as that 1A and Usyk as that 1B type of heavyweight. I think the one interesting thing is, let's sort of fantasy match up both Fury and Usyk, is the fact that Fury possesses in a lot of regards a lot of similar traits that Usyk has.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Fury is the same as Usyk. It's almost kind of like a proto version of the bare basics of what Usyk can do. It's just that Fury is such a ridiculously huge heavyweight and very underrated athleticism, because guys like Tyson Fury should not be able to move as fluid as he normally does. So I think that may be the only thing that kind of that kind of has me wondering, like, is Usyk really the best heavyweight in the world right now? And I mean, look, and Fury's resume at heavyweight is still better than Oleksandr Usyk's right now. I mean, Usyk only has 3 fights at heavyweight: Joshua, Chaz Witherspoon, and Derek Chisora. And to be frank, Usyk didn't look particularly great in those first 2 heavyweight fights. This was his magnum opus at heavyweight, but right now, I would kind of say, if I have to really pick one, I'd say Fury would be just a tad slightly above Usyk at heavyweight. But I mean, pound for pound, to me, Usyk, you can make a very, very strong argument that he's number 1, in my opinion. To me, number 1 at pound for pound, it's a race between him, Canelo Alvarez, and Naoya Inoue. And, Canelo's right on the verge of becoming undisputed champion if he beats Caleb Plant in a couple of months. And Inoue's kind of like in that no man's land where he's fighting a division that no one wants to fight him in, and no fights can get, no big fights can be made at bantamweight. So right now, I got no problem saying that Usyk is number 1. And to sort of go back to an earlier point that you mentioned, Garrett, about Joshua's power, it's not just, to me, it wasn't so much that Usyk's eye was getting marked up and you kind of noticed the power from Joshua. To me, if you look at from rounds 4 to 6, it wasn't just that Joshua was marking up a little bit Usyk's eye. It was the fact that Usyk, his rhythm just kind of seems to be a little bit disrupted. He wasn't moving as well. He was looking a little bit more cautious. He wasn't exactly getting the angles and boxing the way that he did in those first 3 rounds. And I think that was more, Joshua finally making the adjustments. But as I had mentioned sort of in the preview, though I had Joshua winning, we had never seen Joshua really tested since that first Andy Ruiz rematch. Ruiz didn't show up in the second fight. And in the fight against
Douglas in that rematch.
And it repeated itself, literally blow for blow. And in the Kubrat Pulev fight, I mean, no disrespect to Kubrat Pulev, but Joshua could have been maybe the worst version of himself, and he still would have dominated that fight. So there's really nothing that could have properly prepared Joshua, or really anyone, for someone like Oleksandr Usyk. And if you think about it, the more you kind of Joshua waited for this fight to happen. I mean, Usyk was going to get better. He was going to get more acclimated to heavyweight. I mean, he's still very small in today's heavyweight standards. I mean, he would fit in right in like 30 years ago at heavyweight physically. But I mean, this was my question heading into this fight was, is the size difference too big for Oleksandr Usyk? Because I think if you look at it from, who's the better boxer? Even heading into the fight, I said Usyk was the better boxer, but the question wasn't so much the boxing ability. It was so much the size advantage. I mean, going back to sort of Errol Spencer and Mikey Garcia, if we're talking about boxing ability, you can make an argument Mikey's just slightly better, but because Errol is so much bigger and he's also really, really good, that it kind of negated that boxing ability because the size was just too big for Mikey to handle. In this case, it wasn't. Usyk boxed tremendously. He looked every bit the part of a heavyweight. He didn't really look like he was just a blown up cruiserweight anymore. It's just Usyk now has finally gotten time to get healthy because he was dealing with some injury issues in that post cruiserweight pre heavyweight run. He could not find any success getting into the ring because he just kept getting injured in training. But now it seems to me that Usyk now has finally found his footing at the heavyweight division.
One thing that you said was Tyson Fury's length and his height. And I think that's a giant deal for a fight against Usyk because Fury is also very slick. He is also able to get out of tough spots because it is very it's almost second nature to him, whereas Joshua is so much more mechanical when it comes to stuff like that. And the one thing that stands out to me is that Fury also fights tall. Like Joshua fights as if he's in like a karate horse stance the entire time, right? like he's almost like sitting down. So he actually changes his level from being a lot taller than Usyk to being Usyk's height. And Tyson Fury is not going to do that. Tyson Fury is going to stay tall. So when Usyk comes in, he's going to have to raise his levels to punch, whereas Joshua is sitting there right in his eyesight. So I think that's going to be a major difference too. But that's such a great fight. We'll have to sit through the Wilder fight and cross our fingers that Wilder. I mean, I guess if he pulls the upset, it's sort of a great thing for boxing. But I do want to see Fury and Usyk. I don't know how easy it will be to make that fight, but all of those things were great points. So let's talk about the fallout for Anthony Joshua. He's the reason why this building was full, correct? 70,000 people in London, in Tottenham. The biggest draw on that side, especially one of the biggest draws in boxing. Him and Canelo are sort of the rare air with that. But he has now lost 2 fights to one fighter who people thought was more of a journeyman in Andy Ruiz, and then another. And like you said, he's a pound for pound guy, but he's clearly the smaller man in this fight. So, I'm a little worried about where Joshua goes from here. He can always fight guys he's fought before, or he can always pick up wins to kind of get back into contention. But I think it's pretty clear that in a 3-man race with him and Fury and now Usyk, he's third in that race.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, you think about the entire build up to this fight, and it's funny. Joshua came out to, no easy way out, as if he's Rocky IV, but everything about this fight and everything in the build up and the way you've been following it screams to me, this is not Rocky from Rocky IV. This is Rocky in Rocky III pre-Clubber Lang 1. And this is, and Joshua, well, we don't know, we don't know the status of his eye. Eddie Henry's kind of alluding that there might be something with the eyes, more specifically the eye socket, which if it's the eye socket, then
that's rough.
You have to really, consider the possibility that Joshua may not be able to physically be able to exercise that rematch clause. I don't know what the deadline for that is, because sometimes that's negotiable. That's never set in stone. I know there is a rematch clause. I don't know when would be that date, or even if that deadline passes. I mean, there's nothing that would theoretically stop Usyk from fulfilling that, from doing a rematch if they can negotiate one. So the one thing about Joshua is that technically and mechanically, there are times where you still wonder, has he fully gotten out of that Olympic stage where in the Olympics and in amateur boxing, it's almost machine-like with some boxers. Only you get a few rare great boxers who are slick and who fight like they're pros already in the amateur stage. And for as great of an athlete as Anthony Joshua is, I mean, it's becoming abundantly clear that there are a lot of glaring flaws in his game, and again, he's never been tested since the first Andy Ruiz fight. You can say that he boxed so great, but I mean, all he did was just jab in the rematch, and I was screaming from the heavens. That's what Anthony should have done in the first fight. It would have made for a boring fight, but it would have almost guaranteed him a win. But this fight was his first real test since the MSG fight against Andy Ruiz, and it showed me that Anthony Joshua still needs to improve in some ways. I still don't think he fully knows how to fight tall and knows how to use his length to his advantage. You saw in those first couple of rounds, Anthony Joshua, he was kind of crouching down. You mentioned almost like in a karate stance, but the bigger thing was that he was sticking to the center of the ring. He was letting Usyk circle him around, and for Joshua to try and win this fight, it should have been the inverse. Joshua should have been the one moving. She should have been keeping Usyk away from Anthony Joshua, because if Usyk's not able to fully extend his arms and carry that power through, then this was going to be an Usyk fight all night long. And at the same time, it also tested Joshua's ring IQ. He's never had to, adjust so hard to a fight as he did. Going back to the Vladimir Klitschko fight, he really only needed to adjust maybe once, and that's when Klitschko dropped him in the middle of the fight. He adjusted to that, but at no point then Klitschko kind of make an adjustment to that adjustment. Usyk has. Usyk did. And the one thing that even I mentioned in the preview, the one thing that Usyk does so well is that he can take a fighter's best weapon, completely negated, and exploit his weakness, till the cows run home. He did that in the fight against Muragasiev in the World Boxing Super Series Cruiserweight Finals a few years back, where it was on paper the ultimate boxer versus puncher type of fight, and then Usyk literally didn't even get out of second gear because he dominated that fight. It looked more like a glorified sparring session than an undisputed cruiserweight title fight. So, aside from John now needing to really learn how to fight as a tall fighter, I don't know if there's anything else that Joshua can do. And if he can't learn how to do that, then I don't see much chance for Joshua winning a rematch if it does happen.
All right, so you and Robert will be back on Wednesday morning with the Pound for Pound boxing podcast, and I'm sure you guys will chat about this fight a decent amount. I'm sure. I can't wait to hear Robert's takes on what happened.
Oh, it's always fun.
And so, what else? What else is going on? How much are you writing to the Substack these days?
Still a bit of a hiatus in some way. I'm slowly kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to get back into the newsletter and into the Substack? Because I just got a new day job, and I wanted to sort of focus on that first and see how my schedule looks, how I feel physically, especially when working in the legal world. Sometimes it's never an easy job. So my hope is to get it in the next few weeks. I mean, look, I love writing these 8,000, 10,000 word newsletters. I love doing that. I mean, look, people who follow Fight Game Media and knows, obviously we've had Dave Meltzer on quite a few times. They'll sort of know what to expect, at least in the style and what in content of a big form newsletter, except it's all boxing. And there's a lot to look forward to in these final 3 months of 2021. We got Canelo, we got Fury, Wilder 3. I still can't believe that fight is finally happening. It feels like
I'm just waiting for it to fall out, like with
God,
with a couple weeks remaining. Yeah, no, it's going to be great. And, you're recapping most of these big fights for us. So we'll keep a lookout on your recaps here. Carlos Toro Media, is that both Twitter and YouTube?
Yeah. Yep. And hopefully soon I can get also the YouTube channel back up and running it. That's also kind of taken a bit of a hiatus. Really, the main boxing work that I've been doing is with you guys. So hopefully I'll be able to get my feet wet again as far as doing a lot more boxing stuff. But I mean, hell, as you mentioned, Robert and I do the Pound for Pound podcast on the Fight Game Media Patreon every Wednesday morning, and that's not gonna change one bit. Then obviously I don't want it to change. Talking with Robert, I mean, it is always a riot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so that'll be it from here. So for the Patreon listeners, we're also going to have a UFC recap tonight as well. So be on the lookout for that. For the YouTube folks, thank you for checking in with us. We get to see Carlos's smiling face. Appreciate you, Carlos. So for Carlos Toro, I'm Double G. We'll see you when we see you. Peace out.